If I had to start from zero today, no money, no connections, no safety net, I wouldn't panic. I wouldn't pray for luck. I wouldn't beg the universe for a miracle. I would follow the exact strategy I'm about to tell you. Not because it sounds inspiring, but because it is Machiavellian. It is strategic. It is the blueprint the powerful have used for centuries while everyone else waited for permission to exist. People think rising from nothing requires hope. It doesn't. Hope is what you reach for when you've already surrendered. Rising from nothing requires control, control of your mind, your reactions, your direction, and the chaos around you. Machiavelli once wrote, "Fortune is a woman and she favors the bold." Most people misread this as luck. It isn't. He wasn't talking about chance or fate. He was talking about force, the willingness to step into uncertainty and bend it toward your will. Here's the truth no one wants to say out loud. Poverty is not a prison. It is a proving ground. It is the starting point of every man who ever built anything real. The ground is cold, merciless, but it is also clean, empty, ready for a new identity to be written on it. Starting from nothing is not a curse. It's an advantage. It frees you from expectations, from comfort, from the delusion that anything about your life is guaranteed. So understand this clearly. I'm not here to comfort you. I'm here to give you what the world never gave me, the truth. The cold, calculated, unapologetic truth about how to rise when you have absolutely nothing. And it begins with a rule most people will never accept. Fortune does not reward the deserving. She rewards the daring. The biggest lie the poor believe is that opportunity will someday come knocking. That if they wait long enough, pray hard enough, stay humble and patient, life will eventually reward them. It won't. Life does not reward patience, it rewards pressure. It rewards those who move, those who push, those who create openings instead of waiting for them. Most people aren't broke because they lack potential. They're broke because they avoid the very skills that would set them free. They cling to what feels familiar. They protect their comfort like it's treasure. They choose entertainment over evolution, distraction over discipline, identity over improvement. Listen closely, this is where most people lie to themselves. And they tell themselves it's fate, that they're unlucky, that they weren't given a chance. But the truth is far simpler. They fear becoming someone new. They fear the discomfort required to transform. Machiavelli had a word for the force needed to shape destiny: virtue. Not virtue as in goodness, not purity, not morality. Virtue is the strength of character to impose your will on the chaos of reality, to shape circumstances instead of being shaped by them, to act with force when others freeze. And nothing exposes a lack of virtue faster than the skills people run away from. Everyone wants wealth, but they hide from the skills that create it: sales, persuasion, leadership, risk-taking, strategic direction, emotional control. These skills demand rejection. They demand discomfort. They demand the death of your weaker self. So when someone says, "I'm broke because I didn't get a chance," here is the truth they won't admit. You're broke because you avoided the skill that would have given you the chance. Your income is chained to the skill you fear developing. The skill you avoid becomes the prison you live in. And until you confront that fear, until you build virtue, nothing will change. Staying broke is not an accident, it's a decision. A decision to stay exactly who you've always been. Before a single dollar appears, before any opportunity shows itself, before momentum even begins, you need a psychological reset. Wealth doesn't start in a bank account. It starts in the mind. And a man imprisoned by his own mind remains poor in every country, every city, every lifetime. I've watched people move to new countries, switch careers, change friend circles, chase trends, and still end up exactly where they started. Because they never changed the one thing that shapes every result, their internal architecture. You can relocate your body, but if your mentality stays the same, your outcomes won't move an inch. This is where the first transformation begins. And it has nothing to do with gaining something. It's about reclaiming something. Control. There are only two ways to live. You either control your direction or you surrender it. Most people surrender without even realizing it. To their employer, to their fears, to their insecurities, to comfort, to the opinions of people who have accomplished nothing. They surrender their time to distraction, their decisions to hesitation, their potential to habits designed to keep them small. Wealth demands the exact opposite. Wealth requires sovereignty, and sovereignty doesn't mean crowns or kingdoms. It means ruling yourself. Your actions, your focus, your standards, your boundaries, your hours, your emotional responses, your entire trajectory. You cannot build wealth while living as a servant to your impulses or as a follower in your own life. To rise from nothing, you must reclaim the two resources poor men waste the most: time and direction. Reclaim your mornings, reclaim your energy, reclaim the right to decide what matters and what doesn't. Because the moment you take back control, the moment you stop surrendering your power to circumstances, the world stops feeling random, unfair, impossible. You begin to see what Machiavelli understood centuries ago. The man who masters himself eventually masters his environment. The man who surrenders himself is ruled by everything around him. The first transformation is not financial. It is psychological. And without this reset, nothing you build will ever last. Once the psychological reset begins, the next step is choosing the single skill that will pull you out of nothingness. Not 10 skills, not a bucket of ideas. 1. Wealth is never built through scattered effort. It is built through concentrated force. This is where most people destroy themselves. They chase money the way gamblers chase luck, jumping from trend to trend, idea to idea, opportunity to opportunity, burning out before they ever break through. Chasing money is the fastest route to misery because money creates no meaning, no identity, no stamina. Skill does. So I built a grid, simple, ruthless, unforgiving, to choose the one skill that would become my weapon. Axis 1. Competence, what am I good at? Or more importantly, what could I become good at with focused, disciplined effort? Not fantasies, not ego, not delusion, just honest self-awareness. Axis 2, curiosity. What pulls my attention when no one is watching? What do I naturally research, think about, obsess over? What fascinates me enough to endure the brutal grind that mastery demands? Where these two axes intersect, competence and curiosity, that overlap is your wealth seed. That is the soil where you plant your effort, not where the money looks biggest, not where the hype is loudest, but where your growth is sustainable. Because without this overlap, discipline collapses. You can force yourself for a month, but not long enough to reach mastery. Anything that forces you to pretend, fake, or suppress who you are will eventually collapse under its own weight. But when you choose a skill rooted in both competence and curiosity, you create something far more important than income. You create sovereignty through skill. Your skill becomes leverage. Your skill becomes identity. Your skill becomes power. And suddenly you stop begging life for opportunities. Your skill becomes the opportunity. The world starts bending toward you instead of away from you. Chasing money makes you desperate. Building skill makes you powerful. Skill gives you leverage. Skill gives you direction. Skill gives you control. Skill gives you sovereignty. That's why choosing your skill is not a career decision, it is a power decision. And once you choose it, everything else in your life must realign around it. The moment you decide to rise, the world around you shifts. Not because you've transformed overnight, but because your ambition forces everyone else to confront what they've avoided. Poverty keeps you friendly, it keeps you harmless, it keeps you predictable. But the moment you start climbing, the moment your direction changes, you stop being familiar, and you start becoming threatening. Friends will make jokes. Family will raise eyebrows. Co-workers will whisper. Not because they hate you, but because your ambition exposes their stagnation. Your progress becomes a mirror they can't look away from. Every step you take forward reminds them of every step they refuse to take. Here's what most people never understand about human nature. People don't resent your success. They resent the reflection of their own inaction. And this is why the first true obstacle on the path to wealth isn't money, it's social resistance. The people closest to you are the ones who will pull you back, not out of malice, but out of instinct. Human beings are wired for sameness. The tribe survived by moving together. The outlier was left for wolves. So when you decide to rise, every primitive instinct in them screams that something is wrong. Your ambition feels like betrayal. Machiavelli understood this long before psychology had words for it. He wrote about exile, not just physical exile, but emotional and psychological exile. The isolation that always comes before ascension. Every great figure in history was isolated before they were elevated. Not because they desired loneliness, but because their environment refused to rise with them. Your old circle will cling to the version of you that made them comfortable, not the version that forces them to examine their choices. And that is why you cannot rise surrounded by people committed to staying exactly where they are. You will lose people, you will be misunderstood, you will be whispered about, you will be judged for wanting more than survival. But listen closely, this is not a sign you're going the wrong way. It is proof you're going the only way that leads anywhere. The weak call this loneliness. The strong call it evolution. And until you accept this exile, until you embrace the distance that growth demands, you will never reach the level that wealth requires. Once the social resistance begins, you face two choices. Collapse back into the life you're trying to escape, or step into isolation and use it as fuel. Most people collapse. They return to familiar faces, familiar routines, familiar mediocrity, because it feels safe. But safety is the enemy of transformation, and comfort is the coffin of potential. Strategic isolation is not loneliness. It is construction. It is the phase where the old identity dies and a new one is forged, quietly, brutally, deliberately. But here's where most people fail. They cut people off without replacing them. They remove the noise but never install a new signal. And nature hates a vacuum. If you don't fill that space with higher influence, the old voices will crawl back in. The old habits will return. The old limitations will reclaim the throne. So I replaced the people who drained me with people who pulled me forward, even if I could only reach them through books, interviews, letters, documentaries, or biographies. Most of my mentors were dead or unreachable. It didn't matter. Influence is proximity of ideas, not proximity of bodies. I studied everything about the people who built empires. How they spoke, how they thought, how they handled fear, how they structured their days, how they made decisions, how they moved through the world with quiet, unshakable authority. I wasn't looking for motivation. I was looking for systems. Patterns, mental models, worldviews that could overwrite my own, and I installed them like software. I mirrored their clarity. I absorbed their discipline. I adopted their standards. I aligned my habits with their results. Because admiration without transformation is worship, and worship is for the weak. I didn't want to be a fan. Fans clap from the sidelines while their lives crumble. I wanted to be a rival, someone who could enter the same arena, breathe the same air, and compete with the giants who came before me. Because when you aim to rival the great, you are forced to rise to their level, whether they ever see you or not. Strategic isolation isn't about being alone. It's about choosing who gets to shape your identity. And once you replace the voices that kept you small with voices that force you to expand, you stop being who you were and start becoming who you were meant to be. If there is one truth the wealthy understand and the poor fear, it is this: necessity is the most powerful fuel on earth. Not motivation, not inspiration, not positivity, necessity. The pressure that forces action when comfort would prefer hesitation. People think risk is dangerous. In reality, comfort is dangerous. Risk is the only thing that forces growth. When I had nothing, I learned a truth most people never discover. Having no fallback is the greatest advantage you can possess. Because when you cannot retreat, you are forced to advance. The world is not fair, it is structured, and those who understand the structure use it to survive. This is why so many people stay poor. They never create conditions that demand their best. They keep backup plans, escape routes, emotional parachutes, just in case. They live cautiously, believing caution protects them, but all it does is guarantee stagnation. Machiavelli understood this centuries ago. He wrote that the strongest armies are the ones who burn their ships, because when there is no path home, victory becomes a requirement, not a preference, a requirement. Debt is not a chain when used correctly, it becomes a weapon, a force that pushes you forward, a pressure that makes inactivity more painful than action. I'm not talking about reckless consumption or buying what you can't afford. That is stupidity. I'm talking about strategic risk, the kind that binds you to your ambition, eliminates comfort, and forces you to operate at a level you didn't know you were capable of. When you deliberately put yourself in a position where failure has consequences, your mind sharpens, your instincts awaken, your discipline becomes non-negotiable. Fear converts into movement. Movement converts into competence. Competence converts into money. Necessity transforms you. It turns fear into fuel. It turns hesitation into action. It turns potential into performance. When I burned my exits, when I removed every escape route, every plan B, every excuse, everything changed. Not because the world became easier, but because I became harder. When you know you have no choice but to win, you stop negotiating with your excuses. Most people want wealth while clinging to the safety nets of their old lives. It doesn't work like that. You cannot walk toward greatness while holding onto the doorframe of your past. Necessity is the blade that cuts you free. Use it. Once you've built necessity, direction, and momentum, you must face a truth most people never understand. Wealth is not created in isolation. It is created in rooms, real rooms, where decisions are made, alliances are formed, and opportunities are traded long before the public ever hears a whisper. There are circles where money flows like a silent current, private dinners, industry groups, masterminds, elite gatherings, even informal meetups of people who think differently. These rooms aren't glamorous. They aren't advertised. They aren't loud, but they are powerful. And if you're not in these rooms, you're living in the aftermath of decisions you had no part in shaping. Poor people avoid these rooms for one reason: insecurity. They think they're not ready, not successful enough, not smart enough, not qualified. They talk themselves out of the very environments that would elevate them. Rich people do the opposite. They walk in before they're ready. They deliberately position themselves where they are the smallest, the youngest, the least accomplished, because that's exactly where they need to be. They understand that proximity to power is more valuable than perfection. When I first entered these rooms, I didn't speak much. I didn't try to impress anyone. I didn't parade my goals or pitch my dreams. I watched, I listened, I observed everything: how the wealthy carried themselves, how they paused before speaking, how they made decisions without hesitation, how their posture communicated certainty, how their silence carried more weight than most people's words. Power has a rhythm, and when you study it closely enough, you begin to absorb it. But here's the rule almost no one knows: never enter a room of wealth with neediness. Neediness repels power. It signals weakness, desperation, dependency. Power doesn't respect potential. It respects momentum, not dreams, not someday. Momentum. Because momentum isn't just movement, it becomes identity. A man in motion is seen as a man becoming. And identity is what rooms respond to. So before I entered any room, I made sure I was already moving. I came with value, a skill, an insight, a perspective, a connection, a resource, something that made my presence useful, not parasitic. Because the wealthy don't care where you came from. They care where you're going. They don't care who you are. They care what you're building. They don't care about your dreams. They care about your execution. And the moment you bring momentum into a room of power, you stop being an outsider. You become a contender. That's when opportunities appear, not because someone decides to help you, but because you positioned yourself where money actually moves. If you stripped away every tactic, every strategy, every system I've ever used to build wealth, and forced me to keep only one skill, I would keep persuasion. Because persuasion is the printing press of the modern world. It is the engine behind every deal, every opportunity, every connection, every movement. It is the invisible force that turns ideas into income and strangers into allies. Most people are terrible at persuasion because they think selling is about features. This product has this service includes that. Pathetic. People don't buy features, people buy identity. People buy who they believe they will become after saying yes. Identity is the only currency that never loses value. Every sale is a transformation, a future self, a new identity, a shift in status, security, power, or confidence. This is emotional leverage, the ability to speak to the version of themselves they desire but haven't stepped into yet. Because while most people live trapped in their limitations, they secretly ache for who they could be. A persuasion is the bridge between the two. But here's the truth no one tells you. You must sell yourself to yourself first. If you don't believe your mission, if you don't trust your direction, if you don't stand inside your own identity, the world will sense it instantly. People don't buy your words, they buy the conviction behind them, and the uncommitted voice trembles, but the committed voice commands. Power flows to those who replace emotion with precision. It doesn't ask, it doesn't beg, it doesn't negotiate, it declares, it directs, it leads. Machiavelli understood human nature better than anyone. He wrote that men are moved by two forces, love or fear, not logic, not reason, emotion. That is the core of persuasion. You make people feel before you make them decide. Customers, investors, partners, teams, even yourself, nothing moves without emotional leverage. And once you master persuasion, you stop chasing money. Money begins chasing you. Because value uncommunicated is wasted. But value communicated with emotional precision becomes income. Persuasion without direction is chaos. If you don't know where you're going, you'll simply persuade yourself in circles, confident, motivated, and completely lost. So I applied the lesson Machiavelli hinted at in every chapter of his work. Power belongs to those who can measure it. You cannot rule what you do not measure. Not armies, not nations, not wealth, not even yourself. Most people don't fail because they're lazy. They fail because they track nothing. They move all day but progress nowhere. They confuse activity with achievement. They operate on emotion instead of mathematics. But wealth, at its core, is math. Cold, emotionless, unforgiving math. So I took my financial goal, let's say $1 million a year, and I broke it into something a human mind can act on. Let me tell you the part nobody says out loud. 1 million divided by 365 days is about $2,740 per day. Suddenly, the dream wasn't a fantasy. It was a number. Numbers can be hit. Numbers can be planned. Numbers can be reverse engineered. Your brain can execute numbers, not fantasies. Every day I ask myself one question. Did I move $2,740 closer or not? If the answer was no, I changed the strategy. Not next month. Not next year. Today, I tracked everything. Revenue, outreach, conversion rates, time spent on high-value actions, time wasted on low-value distractions. Inputs, not outcomes. Because outcomes are delayed reflections of your inputs. You can't control the market. You can't control the algorithm. You can't control the world. But you can control what you do today. When you start measuring your life, you stop drifting and start ruling. You become the CEO of your own existence. Most people run their lives emotionally. The rich run their lives mathematically. When every action has a metric, every day has a target, and every goal has a formula, you stop hoping for wealth and start engineering it. Dreams inspire you. Numbers direct you. Action transforms you. And when all three align, wealth is no longer a possibility, it becomes a requirement. There comes a point on this path where strategy is no longer enough, where planning, skill, and intelligence all hit their ceiling. And what separates the rich from the almost rich is something most people never develop. Necessita, Machiavelli's word for necessity. The force that turns ambition into obligation. Necessita is the pressure that sharpens a dull life into a weapon. It is hunger that refuses to die. It is the internal fire that doesn't wait for perfect conditions. It acts because inaction is no longer survivable. People love pretending the rich are more talented. They aren't. They're driven by necessita. Talent is optional. Necessita is mandatory. This is the gap, the distance between who you are and who you could be. The poor look at the gap and feel shame, fear, inadequacy. They see how far they must climb and convince themselves the climb is impossible. So they quit. Not because they're incapable, but because they interpret the gap as proof they've already failed. The rich see the gap differently. To them, it is fuel, fire. The only thing worth waking up for, the gap is not your enemy. It is your teacher, your guide, your pressure point. If you feel the discomfort of not being who you want to be, good. That discomfort is the birthplace of greatness. But to grow, you must reject two things. One, reject comfort. Comfort is the slowest poison on earth. People don't fall because they're weak. They fall because they stop moving. Two, reject the identity handed to you by others. Your coworkers, your friends, your family, all of them have built a version of you that benefits their comfort, not your destiny. You must kill that version. The world will never hand you a new identity. You must forge it. And that requires stepping into discomfort as your new baseline. Not occasionally. Not when it's convenient. Daily. Relentlessly. Machiavelli understood that greatness demands a constant stretching of the self. Not a life free of fear, a life lived in spite of it. The almost rich wait to feel ready. The rich move while terrified, because necessita is louder than fear. Everything you've learned, everything you've built, everything you've survived leads to one final test: the willingness to do what others won't. Not because it's glamorous, not because it's comfortable, not because it's easy, but because it is necessary. Fortune does not reward the deserving. It rewards the relentless. The world doesn't care how talented you are. It cares how far you're willing to go, how much you're willing to sacrifice, how much pressure you can absorb without breaking. Yes, the game is rigged. Of course it is. It always has been. But here's what the powerless never understand. You can rig it back. You can tilt the odds with discipline, strategy, repetition, risk, proximity, and hunger. The difference between those who rise and those who rot is brutally simple. One keeps going when every part of them wants to stop. The other stops the moment things get uncomfortable. Most people think they're giving everything, but they quit at 40%. They never touch the remaining 60%. the territory where transformation actually happens. To rise from nothing, you must endure what ordinary people run from: rejection, failure, loneliness, uncertainty, fear, pressure. These aren't obstacles, they are rituals, rites of passage that filter out the weak, the hesitant, the half-committed. Wealth demands sovereignty, a complete psychological and strategic independence, a mindset that refuses to wait for luck or mercy, a posture that commands fortune instead of begging for it. This is the final transformation, the moment you stop asking life for permission and start seizing it with unapologetic aggression. Because when everything is stripped away, one truth remains: fortune favors the bold, but wealth belongs to the strategic, not the good, not the hopeful, not the talented, the relentless. And if you choose to become that person, the world will not be able to stop you. If you made it here, you're not average. Most people would have clicked away the moment they felt discomfort, the moment their excuses started screaming for escape. But you didn't. You stayed, you listened, you absorbed every brutal truth. And that tells me something most people spend their entire lives avoiding. You're hungry, not for motivation, not for feel-good encouragement, but for mastery, for control, for the kind of power that can reshape a life completely. Everything you've heard, the psychology, the strategy, the necessity, this is just the foundation, the beginning, the first step in a much larger transformation, because rising from nothing is only the opening chapter. The next chapter, the one almost no one reaches, is dominion. Not just building wealth, but commanding it. Not just escaping the life you had, but constructing a life that answers to you, and you alone. In the next chapter, we go deeper into the Machiavellian laws of control. How to build systems that obey you. How to create leverage that multiplies your effort. How to design a life that bends toward your ambitions instead of resisting them. If you're ready for that, if you're done playing the game and want to start owning it, then understand this. This journey doesn't end here. It starts here. Because fortune favors the bold, but wealth belongs to the strategic. The world does not belong to everyone. It belongs to the few who dare to take it.